What if Superman landed in World of Warcraft? The last son of Krypton screamed in agony as his body was torn apart, atom by atom, scattered across infinite dimensions by an experiment that was supposed to save his dying world. Clark Kent had been working alongside his father Jor-El in the final days of Krypton, desperately trying to find a way to prevent their planet's destruction. The Dimensional Gateway Project was their last hope, a way to evacuate their people to another reality where Krypton could survive. But as the Red Sun's radiation poisoned their world's core, the gateway became unstable, creating a violent rift in the fabric of space and time itself. "My son!" Jor-El's voice echoed through the laboratory as reality began to collapse around them. "The gateway is pulling you in." Superman fought against the cosmic forces tearing at his invulnerable body, but even his incredible strength was nothing against the raw power of a dimensional vortex. His red cape whipped violently in the otherworldly winds as he was pulled toward the swirling portal of purple and gold energy that had opened in the center of their laboratory. "I have to stop this," Superman shouted over the deafening roar of colliding dimensions. If this gateway stays open, it could destroy everything. But it was too late. The dimensional rift had grown beyond their control, fed by Krypton's dying energy. As Superman reached out to manually shut down the gateway controls, a surge of interdimensional energy struck him directly in the chest. His body became a conduit for forces that existed beyond the physical universe, and in that moment, he experienced something no Kryptonian had ever felt: the sensation of his very essence being scattered across the multiverse. The pain was indescribable. It felt like being struck by lightning while drowning in molten metal, as every cell in his body was simultaneously destroyed and recreated in different realities. He saw flashes of countless worlds, some where Earth was a barren wasteland, others where humanity had never evolved, and strange realms filled with magic and creatures that defied all logic. Then, suddenly, everything went black. Superman's consciousness drifted through the void between worlds for what felt like eternities. He saw the birth and death of stars, witnessed the creation of universes, and felt the weight of cosmic loneliness that came with being truly alone in the infinite darkness. But gradually, he became aware of something calling to him. A world filled with such powerful magical energy that it acted like a beacon in the dimensional storm. The first thing he noticed when he began to regain awareness was the smell. It wasn't the sterile, metallic scent of Krypton's laboratories or the familiar mixture of exhaust and ocean breeze from Metropolis. This was something entirely different. The rich, earthy aroma of grass and wildflowers mixed with something that made his skin tingle with unfamiliar energy. Magic. Though he had no experience with it, Superman somehow knew instinctively that the very air of this world was saturated with mystical forces, unlike anything that existed in his home dimension. His eyes opened slowly, and he found himself staring up at a sky unlike any he had ever seen. 2 moons hung in the twilight heavens, one a familiar silver orb, the other a strange crystalline structure that pulsed with inner light. Floating islands drifted lazily through the air around him, held aloft by some invisible force, their undersides glowing with purple crystal formations that seemed to hum with power. Superman tried to sit up and immediately felt a wave of dizziness wash over him. His body felt different, not weaker exactly, but changed somehow. The yellow sun that had always been the source of his power was nowhere to be seen. Instead, this world's sun was a warm golden orb that filled him with energy, but it was energy of a different quality than what he was used to. It felt wild, untamed, as if it carried the essence of magic within its very light. As his vision cleared, Superman realized he was lying in a field of tall purple grass that swayed gently in a breeze that carried whispers of ancient voices. The ground beneath him was covered with strange symbols carved into weathered stone, ruins of some long-lost civilization that predated anything he had encountered on Earth. By the light, a deep gravelly voice spoke from somewhere nearby. "What manner of being are you?" Superman turned toward the voice and felt his heart skip a beat. Standing at the edge of the field was a creature unlike anything from Earth or Krypton, a massive, green-skinned humanoid with tusks protruding from his lower jaw and intelligent brown eyes that studied Superman with a mixture of curiosity and caution. The being wore elaborate armor decorated with tribal designs and carried a massive war hammer that seemed to crackle with electrical energy. But what struck Superman most was not the creature's imposing physical presence, but the sense of nobility and wisdom that seemed to emanate from him like a tangible force. This was clearly a being of great power and responsibility, much like Superman himself. Superman began, then realized he didn't know how to explain his situation. How do you tell someone that you're an alien from another dimension who was accidentally transported to their world by a failed scientific experiment? I'm not from here. My name is Clark Kent, though most people call me Superman. The green-skinned warrior's eyes narrowed slightly, and Superman could feel the being extending his senses, as if trying to read his very soul. There was something familiar about this sensation. It reminded him of the way psychic heroes like Martian Manhunter could probe minds. But this felt different, more primal, more connected to the natural world around them. I sense no deception in you, Superman, the warrior said, his voice carrying the authority of one accustomed to leadership. But I also sense great power, power that does not belong to this world. I am Thrall, war chief of the Horde and servant of the elements. And you, strange one, have arrived in the sacred lands of Nagrand, at a time when the very balance of our world hangs in the balance. As if summoned by Thrall's words, the wind around them began to pick up, carrying with it the distant sounds of battle, the clash of steel on steel, the roar of magical energies, and the cries of warriors locked in combat. Superman's enhanced hearing caught fragments of desperate voices calling out tactical orders and pleas for reinforcement. There's fighting nearby, Superman said, rising to his feet. To his relief, his powers seemed to be intact, though they felt different in this magical atmosphere. People are in danger. Thrall's expression grew grim. The Burning Legion has launched another assault on our outposts. Demons from the twisting nether seek to corrupt and destroy everything we hold dear. He studied Superman intently. You speak of helping others. In my experience, such words are easily spoken but difficult to live by. What would you risk to defend people you do not even know? Superman didn't hesitate. Everything. The sincerity in his voice seemed to resonate with something deep within Thrall's spirit. The orc shaman nodded slowly, as if recognizing a kindred soul. The ground beneath their feet trembled as a massive explosion erupted in the distance, sending a pillar of green fire spiraling into the twilight sky. Thrall's grip tightened on his hammer while Superman's eyes began to glow with that familiar red energy he had wielded countless times on Earth. Show me, Superman said, his cape billowing as he prepared to take flight. But as he launched himself into the air, something unexpected happened. The magical energies saturating Nagrand's atmosphere interacted with his Kryptonian physiology in ways he had never experienced. His flight felt heavier, more labored, as if he were pushing through invisible currents of raw mystical force. The sensation was disorienting, like trying to swim through honey while lightning danced across his skin. Thrall watched with fascination as Superman struggled to maintain his aerial stability. The spirits of this realm do not know you yet, Outlander. They resist your presence because you carry the essence of another world within your very being. Superman descended back to the ground, frustrated but not defeated. Then we go on foot. Which direction? Without waiting for an answer, he began running toward the sounds of battle, his superhuman speed carrying him across the crystalline landscape faster than any earthbound creature should be able to move. Thrall called upon the wind spirits to carry him alongside the strange visitor, and together they raced toward a sight that made Superman's blood run cold. A Maghar orc settlement was under siege by creatures that defied every law of nature Superman understood. Demons with burning wings swooped down from portal tiers in reality itself, their claws dripping with corrosive feel energy that turned everything they touched into withered ash. Ground forces of twisted humanoids with glowing green eyes advanced in perfect formation, wielding weapons that seemed to be forged from crystallized hatred. But what disturbed Superman most was the way these invaders fought. They showed no mercy, no hesitation, and seemed to take sadistic pleasure in the destruction they caused. Warriors who fell to their blades didn't simply die. Their very souls were being torn from their bodies and consumed by the demons, leaving behind empty husks that crumbled to dust. By Rao, Superman whispered, invoking the Kryptonian deity as he witnessed horrors beyond anything he had faced on Earth. What are these things? Servants of the Burning Legion, Thrall replied grimly, his shamanic senses already reaching out to assess the spiritual damage being done to the land itself. They seek not just conquest, but the complete corruption of all life. Where they tread, the very essence of creation withers and dies. A group of young orc warriors had barricaded themselves behind overturned carts near the settlement's edge, their crude weapons proving ineffective against the demon's armored hide. Superman could see the terror in their eyes, not just fear of death, but something deeper. These creatures somehow threatened the very core of what it meant to be alive. "I have to help them," Superman said, moving forward without hesitation. "Wait!" Thrall called out. "You do not understand the nature of fell magic. Your noble heart makes you vulnerable to their corruption. If you are tainted by their dark energies..." But Superman was already in motion. He slammed into the nearest demon with the force of a meteorite, sending the creature flying backward into a crystalline formation that shattered on impact. The demon's fell-tainted blood splashed across Superman's uniform, and immediately he felt a burning sensation unlike anything he had experienced. The corruption tried to seep into his cells, seeking to twist his Kryptonian DNA into something monstrous. For a terrifying moment, Superman felt his moral compass wavering, whispers of dark thoughts creeping into his mind. Images flashed before his eyes, visions of himself ruling over Earth, not as a protector, but as a conqueror. The Legion's influence was insidious, attacking not just the body, but the very soul. "Focus on the light within you," Thrall shouted, recognizing the signs of fell corruption beginning to take hold. "Do not let their darkness define who you are." Superman gritted his teeth and forced himself to remember why he fought. Not for glory or power, but because someone had to stand between the innocent and those who would harm them. The corruption recoiled from this pure intention, unable to take root in a heart that was truly selfless. With a roar that shook the floating islands above, Superman unleashed his heat vision in a wide arc, carving through the demon ranks like a crimson blade through shadow. But instead of his usual precise, controlled beams, the energy that emerged was wild and chaotic, crackling with golden sparks that seemed to resonate with the magical elements around him. Thrall watched in amazement as Superman's heat vision began to interact with Nagran's mystical atmosphere. The beams took on properties of holy light, burning away fell corruption wherever they touched, and leaving behind patches of ground that actually glowed with renewed life force. "Impossible," one of the surviving orc warriors breathed. "He channels the light without training, without faith in the holy teachings. How?" The battle raged for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Superman found himself having to completely relearn how to fight in this magical environment. His strength was still formidable, but the demons possessed abilities that bypassed physical defenses entirely. Shadow bolts that struck directly at his life force, fear spells that tried to paralyze him with visions of Krypton's destruction, and worst of all, corruption effects that attempted to turn his own powers against the innocent. Thrall proved to be an invaluable ally, his mastery over the elements providing both offensive support and crucial protection against magical attacks. Lightning called down from the crystal-charged atmosphere struck demons with devastating effect, while walls of earth rose to shield the fleeing civilians from the worst of the carnage. "Your fighting style is too direct," Thrall called out as he hurled his enchanted hammer at a particularly large demon, the weapon crackling with stored lightning as it struck. "These creatures feed on aggression and violence. You must find balance between action and restraint." Superman paused in his assault, realizing that his usual approach of overwhelming force was actually making some of the demons stronger. The fell energy they wielded seemed to grow more potent when met with pure physical aggression. He needed to think differently, fight smarter. Drawing upon lessons learned from his encounters with magical foes on Earth, Superman began to focus on precision rather than power. Instead of devastating wide-area attacks, he used surgical strikes to disrupt the demon's formation and create openings for Thrall's elemental magic to exploit. The tide of battle began to turn when Superman discovered something remarkable about his interaction with this world's magic. When he acted with pure defensive intent, shielding civilians, protecting the wounded, his powers seemed to resonate with what Thrall called the light, creating barriers of golden energy that the demons could not penetrate. "You are not just fighting them," Thrall observed with growing respect. "You are healing the spiritual wounds they create. I have never seen anything like it." As the last of the demons fell or fled through their portal tears back to the twisting nether, Superman found himself surrounded by grateful but wary orc civilians. They had seen him fight with the fury of their greatest heroes, but his alien appearance and otherworldly powers made them uncertain how to react. An elderly orc shaman approached cautiously, her weathered hands glowing with diagnostic magic as she examined the lingering traces of Superman's energy signature. "You carry no fel taint," she said with surprise. "Despite direct contact with Legion corruption, your spirit remains pure. This should be impossible. Maybe where I come from, we have different rules about what's possible," Superman replied with a tired smile. Thrall stepped forward, addressing his people with the authority of a leader who had guided them through countless trials. "This stranger has fought beside us with honor. He asks for nothing, and risked everything to defend those he had never met. By the laws of our ancestors, he has earned the right to shelter and sustenance." But not all the gathered orcs were convinced. A scarred warrior stepped forward, his tusks filed to sharp points and his eyes filled with suspicion. "He fights like one possessed, Warchief. How do we know he is not some new trick of the Legion? A weapon designed to infiltrate our ranks?" The tension in the air was palpable as Superman realized he stood at a crossroads. These people had every reason to be paranoid after centuries of betrayal and corruption. He could try to convince them with words, but actions had always spoken louder in his experience. Instead of defending himself, Superman knelt down and placed his hands on a patch of ground that had been corrupted by Feel energy during the battle. Closing his eyes, he reached deep within himself, past his Kryptonian heritage, past his adopted human values, to something even more fundamental: the simple desire to heal rather than harm. Golden light flowed from his hands into the poisoned earth, and slowly, impossibly, green grass began to grow where only ash had remained. The transformation spreading beneath Superman's hands was nothing short of miraculous. Where fell corruption had left the earth barren and twisted, vibrant life now bloomed in spiraling patterns that seemed to pulse with their own inner rhythm. The grass that emerged wasn't the simple green vegetation of Earth, but something far more complex. Each blade shimmered with traces of silver and gold, as if infused with starlight itself. The scarred orc warrior who had questioned Superman's motives stumbled backward, his weathered face slack with amazement. "The ancestors preserve us," he whispered. "He commands the primal forces themselves." But Superman barely heard the reactions around him. As his power flowed into the corrupted ground, he began to experience something unprecedented. Memories that weren't his own flooded his consciousness. Visions of Draenor's ancient past unfolded before him like pages in a cosmic book, showing him the world as it existed before the Legion's influence poisoned it. He saw vast forests where every tree was a masterwork of natural art, their branches intertwining to form living cathedrals that touched the clouds, crystal formations that sang in harmony with the wind, creating music that could heal both body and spirit. Most remarkably, he witnessed the intricate balance between all living things, a harmony so perfect that death itself was merely another note in an eternal symphony of renewal. "What are you seeing?" Thrall asked softly, recognizing the distant look in Superman's eyes as one he had worn during his own spiritual revelations. "Your world's history," Superman replied, his voice filled with wonder. "It's beautiful, Thrall. Before the corruption, before the wars, this place was paradise. But something went wrong. I can feel the wound in reality itself, like a scar across the fabric of existence." The elderly orc shaman approached with reverent caution, her mystical senses overwhelmed by the energies radiating from Superman's healing work. "You speak of the Great Sundering," she said, "when Ner'zhul's reckless magic tore our world apart and cast the fragments into the void. But that knowledge is sacred, hidden in the deepest meditations. How can an outsider perceive such truths?" Superman rose from his kneeling position, the restored patch of ground continuing to flourish around him. "Maybe being from outside your reality lets me see patterns you're too close to notice, like looking at a painting from across the room instead of with your nose pressed against the canvas." Thrall nodded thoughtfully, his shamanic wisdom recognizing the profound implications of what he had witnessed. "The elements themselves have accepted you," he observed. "Earth responds to your touch, the wind carries your scent without hostility, and the fire within you burns clean rather than consuming. This is unprecedented." As word of the miraculous healing spread through the settlement, more orcs emerged from their shelters to witness the phenomenon. Among them came a figure that made Superman's enhanced senses tingle with recognition of immense power barely contained. An ancient orc whose very presence seemed to bend reality around him. "I am Drekthar," the newcomer announced, his blind eyes somehow seeing more than those with perfect vision. "Elder shaman of the Frostwolf clan and keeper of the old ways. You, stranger, carry within you echoes of the first light, the primal force from which all creation springs. Yet you are not of Azeroth, nor of any realm connected to our world tree of existence." Superman felt a chill of recognition at those words. On Krypton, their most ancient texts had spoken of a similar concept, a fundamental creative force that existed before matter, energy, or even time itself. The first light, he repeated. On my homeworld, we called it the life equation, the mathematical proof that existence itself is sacred. Drekthar's eyeless gaze seemed to pierce directly into Superman's soul. Your arrival here is no accident, son of distant stars. The cosmic forces that govern reality have been disturbed by an enemy that seeks to corrupt not just worlds, but the very nature of existence itself. You have been drawn to us as a sword is drawn from its sheath when war approaches. The implications of this revelation settled over Superman like a heavy mantle. His accidental arrival in this dimension wasn't just a random consequence of Krypton's destruction. It was part of some larger pattern, a cosmic response to a threat that transcended individual worlds or even galaxies. Tell me about this enemy, Superman said, his journalist instincts combining with his hero's determination to understand the full scope of what they faced. Thrall and Drekthar exchanged meaningful glances before the elder shaman began to speak in the measured tones of one who had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations. They call themselves the Burning Legion, but they are something far more terrible than mere conquerors. They are corruption incarnate, the antithesis of creation itself. Wherever they pass, not only do civilizations die, but the very possibility of life is permanently scarred. The old shaman gestured toward the floating islands above them, and Superman noticed for the first time that some of the crystal formations were dark and lifeless, wounds in the mystical ecosystem that even this world's incredible regenerative powers couldn't heal. Their leader, Sargeras, was once a champion of order and protection, much like yourself, Drekthar continued. But he felt a despair when he realized that evil would always exist, that there would always be those who chose darkness over light. Rather than continue the eternal struggle between good and evil, he decided to end it by destroying all existence. Superman felt a cold recognition in his chest. He had faced similar philosophical challenges himself, moments when the weight of protecting others seemed impossible to bear, when the cycle of saving and resaving seemed endless. But choosing to destroy everything, that's not solving the problem, that's becoming the problem. Precisely, Thrall agreed. But Sargeras convinced himself that oblivion was preferable to imperfection. He gathered to himself other beings who had given in to similar despair, and together they became a plague upon reality itself. They have consumed thousands of worlds, and each victory makes them stronger. As Superman absorbed this information, he became aware of subtle changes in his surroundings. The other orcs who had gathered to witness his healing miracle were no longer looking at him with suspicion or awe, but with something else, hope. It was the expression he recognized from countless faces on Earth, the look of people who had finally found someone willing to stand between them and the darkness. But this hope came with its own weight of responsibility. These people weren't just looking for a protector. They needed someone who could help them believe that their long struggle against impossible odds actually meant something, that their losses and sacrifices weren't in vain. A young orc female stepped forward from the crowd, her armor bearing the scars of countless battles, but her eyes still bright with determination. If you truly wish to understand our enemy, she said, then you must see what they have done to our sacred places. The throne of elements lies not far from here, or what remains of it after the Legion's corruption. Thrall's expression darkened. Agra speaks truth, but I would not wish such sights upon anyone. The throne was where we communed with the elemental lords themselves, where the balance between all forces was maintained. What the demons did there. He trailed off, unable to find words for the spiritual devastation. Superman placed a reassuring hand on Thrall's shoulder, surprised by how natural the gesture felt, despite their vast cultural differences. Sometimes bearing witness to tragedy is the first step toward preventing it from happening again. If you're willing to show me, I'm ready to see. The journey to the Throne of Elements took them across landscapes that told the story of Draenor's tortured history in geological terms. Here, a valley where the very rocks had been twisted into agonized shapes by uncontrolled magical energies. There, a river that ran red not with blood, but with liquefied hatred, its waters poisonous to any form of life. But the most disturbing aspect of their travel was what Superman's enhanced vision revealed in the spaces between visible reality. Using a technique he had developed to see through dimensional barriers, he could perceive the scars that the Legion's presence had left on the fabric of space-time itself. Tears in existence that leaked chaotic energy, wounds that would take millennia to heal, even if no further damage was done. This is what victory looks like for them, Superman observed as they crested a hill and saw the ruins of the Throne of Elements spread out before them. Not just conquest, but the permanent mutilation of everything beautiful and sacred. Where once had stood a magnificent amphitheater of living stone and crystal, now only twisted wreckage remained. The 4 elemental shrines, earth, air, fire, and water, had been not just destroyed but perverted, turned into monuments to suffering and despair. Worst of all, Superman could sense that something of the elemental lords themselves still lingered here, trapped in eternal torment by the Legion's cruel magic. "Can they be saved?" he asked, though he already suspected the answer from the anguish written across Thrall's face. "That is the true horror of what our enemies do," the orc shaman replied. "They don't simply kill, they corrupt. The elemental lords are immortal beings of pure natural force. They cannot die, but they can be twisted into serving purposes that betray everything they once represented. The Earth Lord now spreads poison instead of growth. The Wind Lord carries diseases instead of fresh breath. They exist in constant agony, forced to act against their very nature." Standing amid the ruins of this sacred place, Superman felt something crystallize within him. This wasn't just about stopping an invasion or defending a single world. This was about preserving the fundamental right of existence to remain meaningful. The Legion represented something far more threatening than any villain he had faced on Earth. They were philosophical opponents who challenged the very idea that life was worth living. "Then we heal them," he said simply, his cape billowing in the corrupted winds that howled through the ruined shrine. "All of them, however long it takes, however difficult it becomes, because the alternative is accepting that some wounds are too deep to heal, and I refuse to believe that." Thrall looked at him with a mixture of admiration and concern. The power required for such an undertaking, it would be beyond anything attempted in our world's history, even if it were possible. "The cost would be worth paying," Superman finished. "Because that's what heroes do, Thrall. We pay the costs that others can't afford, so they don't have to live in a world where hope is just a pleasant delusion." The portal that opened above the ruined throne of elements tore through reality with the sound of 1,000 screaming souls. Emerald flames cascaded from its edges as Legion forces began pouring through in numbers that dwarfed the previous assault. This wasn't a raid or reconnaissance mission. This was a full-scale invasion force led by beings whose very presence made the air itself recoil in horror. Superman's first instinct was to launch himself directly at the largest threat, but Thrall's firm grip on his arm stopped him. "Wait," the orc commanded, his shamanic senses reading currents of power that physical eyes couldn't perceive. "This attack is different. They're not just trying to destroy, they're harvesting something." Through the chaos of descending demons, Superman's enhanced vision focused on what the invasion force was actually doing. While the frontline troops engaged in their typical destruction, specialized units were converging on the corrupted elemental shrines. They carried crystalline devices that pulsed with the same sickly green energy as the demons themselves, and wherever these artifacts were placed, the lingering essence of the trapped elemental lords began flowing into them like water into a drain. "They're stealing the elemental's power," Superman realized with growing alarm. But why? What could they possibly need that much raw elemental force for? His question was answered when the largest demon he had ever encountered descended through the portal. The creature stood 30 feet tall, its body a nightmare fusion of molten metal and living shadow. But what made Superman's Kryptonian instincts scream warnings wasn't its size or obvious power. It was the way reality seemed to bend around it, as if the fundamental laws of physics were merely suggestions in its presence. "Manaroth," Thrall breathed, his voice filled with a mixture of ancient hatred and instinctive terror. "The Destructor himself. He was the one who first corrupted my people with the blood curse. His presence here means the Legion considers this world strategically vital." The massive Pit Lord's voice boomed across the battlefield like an avalanche of broken glass. "I smell the stench of hope in this place. How delightfully naive. Did you truly believe your pitiful resistance could prevent the inevitable? The stolen power of your elemental lords will fuel the great engine, and through it, reality itself will be unmade and reborn in our image." Superman stepped forward, his cape snapping in winds that carried the scent of sulfur and despair. "I don't know what this great engine is, but I know one thing for certain. You're not taking anything else from these people." Manaroth's laugh was like the sound of continents colliding. "Another would-be hero rises to face the darkness. Tell me, little godling, do you know what happened to the last champion who stood against me? His skull adorns my throne room, and his screams still echo through the twisted nether." But as the Pit Lord's gaze fell upon Superman, something unexpected happened. The demon's expression shifted from casual contempt to genuine surprise, then to something that might have been uncertainty. You are not of this reality. How is this possible? The Legion's agents reported no interdimensional travelers in this sector. Maybe your intelligence network isn't as good as you thought, Superman replied, his eyes beginning to glow with heat vision that had somehow taken on a golden radiance in this magical atmosphere. The battle that erupted defied every law of combat that either side had previously understood. Superman's heat vision clashed with Manaroth's ethereal flames in spectacular displays that painted the sky in alternating shades of gold and green. But this wasn't just a contest of raw power. It was a collision between two fundamentally different philosophies of existence. Manaroth fought with the accumulated malice of eons, each strike designed not just to destroy but to corrupt and demoralize. His weapons carried curses that sought to turn Superman's own strength against him, and his very presence projected an aura of hopelessness that had broken countless heroes before they could land a single blow. But Superman fought with something the Pit Lord had never encountered in such pure concentration: absolute faith in the value of life itself. Every punch he threw carried the weight of everyone he had ever saved, every moment of joy he had helped preserve, every tomorrow he had made possible through his actions. The philosophical nature of their conflict became literal when their powers collided at full strength. Where Superman's heat vision met Manaroth's fell fire, the very nature of reality became contested ground. Small pockets of space-time began manifesting different universal laws. Areas where gravity flowed upward, where time moved in reverse, where the impossible became inevitable. Fascinating, Drekthar observed from a safe distance, his mystical senses overwhelmed by the cosmic forces at play. They are not simply fighting each other. They are fighting for the right to define what existence means. Thrall, meanwhile, was coordinating the defense against the lesser demons while keeping one eye on the titanic struggle between Superman and Manaroth. The elemental spirits are responding to their conflict, he called out over the din of battle. They're choosing sides based on which combatant's vision of reality resonates with their nature. Indeed, the corrupted elemental lords trapped within the shrine were beginning to stir. The Earth Lord's voice, distorted by eons of forced servitude, rumbled through the ground itself. The Golden One offers restoration. The Shadow One promises only more chains. Superman heard this and immediately adjusted his strategy. Instead of trying to overwhelm Manaroth with brute force, he began channeling his power through the ruined shrine itself, using the trapped elementals as conduits for energies they had been denied for countless years. The effect was transformative, literally. Where Superman's power flowed through the Earth Lord's essence, Poison Stone began returning to its natural state. The corrupted crystal formations that had channeled fell energy for decades suddenly blazed with clean white light. Most remarkably, the tortured screams that had echoed from the shrine for so long began transforming into something that sounded almost like singing. "Impossible!" Manaroth roared, his attacks becoming more desperate as he realized what was happening. "The corruption is absolute. There is no redemption from the Legion's touch." "You're wrong," Superman replied, dodging a massive fist that left craters in the mountainside. "There's always redemption. Sometimes it just takes someone willing to pay the price for it." With that declaration, Superman did something that shocked both allies and enemies alike. He stopped fighting defensively. Instead of avoiding Manaroth's corrupting attacks, he began absorbing them directly, allowing the feel energy to enter his body while simultaneously channeling it through his own purified power into the elemental shrines. The pain was indescribable. Superman felt his very essence being torn between two incompatible states of existence: the pure creative force he represented and the consuming darkness of Legion corruption. But he held on, using his Kryptonian physiology's natural resistance to transformation as an anchor while he processed the demonic energy and converted it into something that could heal rather than harm. "You fool!" Manaroth screamed, his voice carrying undertones of genuine fear for the first time in millennia. "You'll destroy yourself. No being can contain that much raw contradiction." But Superman wasn't just containing it. He was transforming it. Drawing upon techniques he had learned from his encounters with magical threats on Earth, combined with the shamanic wisdom Thrall had shared with him, he began treating the fell corruption like a disease that could be cured rather than an absolute state that had to be accepted. The process reached its climax when Superman, his body glowing like a star as conflicting energies raged within him, placed his hands directly on the central altar of the Throne of Elements. The moment his palms touched the corrupted stone, every elemental lord imprisoned within the shrine spoke in unison, their voices combining into a harmony that had not been heard since Draenor was whole. "We remember ourselves." The explosion of pure elemental force that erupted from the shrine was visible from orbit. Air elementals burst free from their prisons and immediately began cleansing the atmosphere of toxic compounds. Earth elementals emerged to repair the damaged landscape with hands that shaped stone like clay. Fire elementals burned away corruption while water elementals washed the spiritual wounds clean. But the most profound change was in Manaroth himself. The Pit Lord staggered backward as the fundamental assumptions that powered his existence began to crumble. For eons he had drawn strength from the certainty that corruption was irreversible, that hope was merely delayed despair. Now, confronted with proof that even the deepest spiritual wounds could be healed, his very nature was in crisis. "This cannot be," he whispered, his massive form beginning to fade at the edges. "The Legion's victory is assured. Sargeras has seen all possible futures, and in every one creation bows before the cleansing flame of extinction." Superman, his body still crackling with residual energies from his transformation of the fell corruption, stepped toward the wavering demon. "Then maybe it's time to create an impossible future. One your master never saw coming." The Pit Lord's form began dissolving as the fundamental logic that bound his existence to the material plane unraveled. But his final words carried a promise that chilled everyone who heard them. "You have won a single battle, Starchild. But the war spans infinite realities, and the Legion's patience is as eternal as the void itself. We will return, and when we do, we will bring weapons designed specifically to corrupt beings like you." As Manaroth vanished back to the twisted nether, the liberated elemental lords turned their attention to Superman. The Fire Lord spoke first, his voice like the contented crackling of a hearth on a cold night. "You have given us back ourselves, champion of light. In return, we offer you understanding of the deeper magics that flow through all realities." "The Legion seeks to build something terrible," the Water Lord added, her voice like rain on peaceful rivers. "A machine that can rewrite the fundamental forces that govern existence. They need elemental essences from multiple worlds to power it, but they also need something else, the willing corruption of a being of pure light." The implications hit Superman like a physical blow. They're not just trying to conquer worlds, they're trying to corrupt heroes, to prove that everyone has a breaking point. "And you, Starchild," the Earth Lord rumbled with the gravity of mountains, "represent their greatest challenge yet. A being whose light burns so bright that its corruption would provide the final component for their great engine. You must be exceedingly careful, for they will not try to defeat you in battle. They will try to make you choose darkness willingly." As the immediate crisis passed and the celebration of the Elemental Lord's liberation began, Superman found himself contemplating a troubling truth. His arrival in this dimension hadn't been an accident. It had been anticipated, perhaps even orchestrated. The Legion wasn't just fighting a war of conquest. They were conducting an elaborate experiment in moral philosophy, and he had just become their primary test subject. The portal that opened 3 days after Manaroth's defeat shimmered with unfamiliar energies. Not the sickly green of fell magic, but brilliant blues and golds that spoke of purpose rather than corruption. Through it stepped beings that made even Superman pause in recognition of their otherworldly majesty. The Naru, crystalline beings of pure light, floated gracefully into Nagran's restored atmosphere. Their leader, a massive entity whose faceted form refracted light into rainbow patterns that somehow conveyed profound meaning, spoke in harmonics that bypassed the ears entirely and resonated directly within the soul. "We are Adal of the Shattered Sun. We have traveled far to meet the one who has accomplished what our kind believed impossible, the willing transformation of Legion corruption into pure light." Superman stepped forward respectfully, instinctively recognizing beings whose commitment to protecting life matched his own. "I'm honored to meet you, but I have to ask, how did you know what happened here? The battle ended only days ago." "The liberation of elemental lords creates ripples that extend across multiple dimensions," Adal explained, its form pulsing with each word. "More importantly, your method of purification has been observed by entities far more dangerous than ourselves. Even now, the Legion's strategists work to understand how you achieved the impossible." Thrall joined the conversation, his shamanic senses overwhelmed by the Naru's presence, but his leadership instincts engaged. "You speak as if Superman's victory has created new dangers. How can healing corruption be a threat?" Adal's crystalline form dimmed slightly, a change that somehow conveyed infinite sadness. "Because it proves that the Legion's fundamental philosophy is flawed. For eons they have justified their actions by claiming that corruption is absolute, that some wounds cannot heal, that destruction is sometimes mercy. Your success challenges the very foundation of their existence." The implications settled over the group like a cold shadow, despite the warm light emanating from the Naru. Superman had not just won a battle. He had struck at the heart of everything the Burning Legion used to justify its cosmic genocide. "They will escalate," Adal continued. The forces arrayed against this reality will no longer be mere invasion armies. They will send their most terrible champions, beings whose corruption runs so deep that even your purifying touch might not reach them. And they will target not just you, but everyone you seek to protect. As if summoned by these ominous words, the sound of clashing metal echoed across the crystalline landscape. In the distance, a sight that filled both Alliance and Horde veterans with recognition appeared. Airships bearing the colors of Stormwind and Orgrimmar, flying in close formation despite their traditional enmity. The lead vessel, a massive dreadnought bearing the lion banner of the Alliance, descended toward the restored Throne of Elements. From its deck descended figures that represented the pinnacle of Azeroth's heroic traditions. King Varian Wrynn of Stormwind, his presence commanding even without words, and beside him, High King Magni Bronzebeard, whose very footsteps seemed to resonate with the strength of mountains. From the Horde vessels came equally legendary figures. Vol'jin, Shadowhunter and leader of the Darkspear tribe, moved with the fluid grace of one who walked between the worlds of the living and the dead. Beside him strode Cairn Bloodhoof, the elderly Tauren chieftain whose wisdom was matched only by his unshakable moral courage. But it was the figure who emerged from a smaller, more discreet vessel that commanded the most attention. Jaina Proudmoore, Archmage of Dalaran, approached with measured steps that left traces of frost in the warm grass. Her eyes, ancient beyond her apparent years, studied Superman with the intensity of one who had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations. "So," King Varian said, his voice carrying the authority of one born to leadership, "you are the stranger who has accomplished what our combined armies could not." The reports seemed too extraordinary to believe. Superman inclined his head respectfully. "I had help. Thrall and his people taught me things about courage that I never learned on my homeworld." "Modest words," Vol'jin observed, his tusked smile carrying genuine warmth despite the shadows that seemed to dance around his form. "But Daw spirits tell a different tale, Mon. They speak of a warrior who chose to bear corruption within his own body rather than see others suffer. Such sacrifice be rare in any world." Jaina stepped forward, her magical senses probing Superman's energy signature with careful precision. "The residual energies around you are fascinating," she said in the tone of a scholar encountering a completely new field of study. "You've somehow created a stable fusion between extraplanar life force and pure arcane energy. The theoretical implications alone—" "With respect, Archmage," Thrall interrupted, "this is not merely an academic curiosity. The Legion's response to recent events suggests a fundamental shift in their strategy. They no longer seek simple conquest." Cairn Bloodhoof, his massive frame moving with surprising grace, approached Superman directly. "Young hero," he said, his voice carrying the weight of countless seasons. "May I?" When Superman nodded, the Tauren chieftain placed one enormous hand on Superman's shoulder. The contact established an instant connection that bypassed language entirely. Through some form of spiritual communion, Cairn experienced fragments of Superman's memories: the destruction of Krypton, his adoption by the Kents, his first rescue, the weight of choosing to be a symbol of hope in a world that often seemed determined to disappoint. "You carry more than powers," Cairn said softly when the connection ended. "You carry the dreams of an entire people who believed that life should be protected rather than merely preserved. This burden, it is why the Legion fears you more than any army." King Varian's expression grew thoughtful as he processed this revelation. A warrior fighting not for glory or even survival, but for principles. "I understand why that would threaten beings who justify their actions through necessity and pragmatism." But it was Jaina who voiced the question that had been troubling everyone present. "The power you displayed against Manaroth, transforming fell energy into pure light, requires a level of spiritual purity that should be impossible to maintain in actual combat. How do you preserve your principles when facing enemies who have no limits?" Superman was quiet for a long moment, his gaze drifting to the restored elemental shrines where new life bloomed in impossible abundance. "I remember something my adoptive father told me when I was young. He said that the moment you start believing that fighting monsters requires becoming a monster, you've already lost the most important battle, the one for your own soul." "Wise words," Adal interjected, its crystalline form resonating with approval. "But the Legion strategists have likely analyzed your psychological profile extensively. They will not attempt to defeat you through corruption or overwhelming force. They will create scenarios where your principles conflict with each other, where saving one group requires abandoning another." Thrall's expression darkened as he grasped the implications. "They will force you to choose who lives and who dies, then use your anguish over those choices to slowly erode your faith in yourself." "Precisely," Vol'jin agreed grimly. It'd be an old tactic, older than the Legion itself. Make a hero doubt their own judgment, and eventually they become paralyzed by fear of making the wrong choice. Superman listened to these warnings with the gravity they deserved, but his response surprised everyone present. Then I'll have to make sure I don't face those choices alone. On my homeworld, I learned that the strength of a hero isn't measured by what they can accomplish in isolation, but by their ability to inspire others to be heroic as well. King Varian's eyebrows rose in surprise. You're suggesting an alliance between Alliance and Horde based on shared principles rather than mutual necessity? I'm suggesting something more than that, Superman replied, his voice carrying conviction that seemed to resonate with the very air around them. I'm suggesting that we stop thinking about this as a war between our factions and the Legion, and start thinking about it as a chance to prove that cooperation can accomplish things that competition never could. Jaina's eyes widened as she grasped the full scope of what Superman was proposing. A united front, not just in military terms, but in philosophical ones. Showing through our actions that existence is worth preserving, not despite our differences, but because of them. The Legion seeks to prove that conflict is inevitable, that all beings will eventually choose destruction over the hard work of building something better, Cairn added thoughtfully. By working together, we deny them that proof. Adal's form blazed brighter as it processed this concept. Such unity would require more than temporary military cooperation. It would demand that each faction surrender their certainty that their way is the only correct path. And that, Thrall said with a smile that carried both hope and challenge, might be the most difficult battle any of us have ever fought. As the sun set over the restored landscape of Nagrand, painting the floating islands in shades of gold and crimson, the assembled leaders began planning not just a military campaign, but an experiment in whether beings from vastly different cultures could truly learn to see past their differences. The stakes were nothing less than the future of existence itself, and the outcome would depend not on superior firepower or tactical brilliance, but on whether the simple belief that life was worth protecting could prove stronger than eons of cynicism and despair. Superman stood at the center of these discussions, no longer feeling like an outsider trying to understand an alien world, but like someone who had finally found a cause worthy of the powers he had been given. The Legion might have planned for him to be their ultimate test subject, but they had made one crucial miscalculation. They had assumed he would face that test alone. Instead, he had found something more powerful than any weapon or defensive strategy. A group of people willing to bet everything on the radical idea that hope was not just a pleasant delusion, but the most practical force in the universe. The attack came not with roaring demons or foul fire, but with whispers that crept through dreams and doubts that multiplied in moments of quiet reflection. Superman noticed it first during what should have been a peaceful morning in the newly established Joint Alliance Horde camp. The representatives from both factions, who had spent the previous evening planning their unprecedented cooperation, now regarded each other with suspicion that seemed to have materialized overnight. Something's wrong, Superman told Thrall as they observed a heated argument between Jaina and Vol'jin over supply distribution protocols they had easily agreed upon the day before. This isn't natural political tension. Thrall's shamanic senses were already probing the spiritual atmosphere around the camp. The elements speak of a creeping sickness, not of the body, but of the mind. Someone or something is amplifying every small disagreement, every moment of doubt. The insidious nature of the assault became clear when Superman attempted to mediate the dispute between the Alliance and Horde representatives. As he approached the arguing leaders, he found his own thoughts becoming clouded with uncharacteristic cynicism. Why was he wasting time trying to unite people who would inevitably return to their old conflicts? Wouldn't it be more efficient to simply impose order through superior force? These alien thoughts felt like parasites in his mind, feeding on his worst impulses and magnifying them until they seemed like reasonable conclusions. But Superman's experience with psychic attacks on Earth had taught him to recognize when his mental processes were being manipulated. "Everyone stop talking," he commanded, his voice carrying enough authority to cut through the escalating tensions. "We're under attack. Not physically, but mentally. Something is poisoning our ability to think clearly." King Varian paused mid-sentence in what had been an increasingly aggressive tirade about Horde unreliability. That would explain why I suddenly feel convinced that negotiating with the Horde is pointless. These aren't my normal thoughts. Nor mine, Vol'jin admitted, his usual calm demeanor returning as he recognized the external influence. The shadow hunters have ways of dealing with mind magic, but this be more subtle than anything I've encountered. Adal's crystalline form pulsed with urgent warning signals. This technique bears the signature of Kill Jaden the Deceiver, one of the Legion's most cunning commanders. He specializes in corrupting alliances from within, turning allies against each other without them realizing they're being manipulated. Jaina's eyes blazed with arcane power as she began weaving detection spells around the camp's perimeter. He's not here physically. This is some form of long-distance psychic manipulation, probably channeled through... Oh no. Her spell revealed the horrible truth. Scattered throughout the camp were objects that looked like ordinary stones, but which pulsed with malevolent energy under magical examination. The rocks had been placed with surgical precision to create a network that amplified negative emotions while suppressing empathy and rational thought. How long have these been here? Superman asked, his enhanced vision now picking up the subtle wrongness that emanated from each corrupted stone. Based on the spiritual residue, Thrall determined after consulting with the local earth spirits, they were planted during the night, probably by infiltrators using shadow magic to avoid detection. But the truly insidious aspect of the attack became apparent when they attempted to remove the stones. Each one they destroyed weakened the overall effect, but also triggered a feedback that amplified whatever negative emotions the affected person was currently experiencing. The process of cleansing the corruption required them to confront their darkest thoughts, while those very thoughts were being artificially strengthened. Superman volunteered to handle the removal personally, but his first attempt nearly ended in disaster. As his hands closed around one of the corrupted stones, he was suddenly overwhelmed with visions of every person he had failed to save. Every moment when his powers hadn't been enough. Every time his presence had inadvertently caused more harm than good. The weight of these failures, magnified beyond all proportion, drove him to his knees. For a terrifying moment, the voice of Kil'jaeden himself seemed to whisper directly into his mind. You see the truth now, don't you? Your very existence brings nothing but conflict and suffering. How many must die because you refuse to accept that some problems have no heroic solutions? It was Cairn Bloodhoof who broke Superman free from the psychic assault, the elderly Tauren's massive hand settling on his shoulder with the grounding weight of ancient wisdom. The doubts are real, young one, but their magnitude is false. Every hero carries regrets, but wisdom lies in learning from failure rather than being paralyzed by it. Together they developed a method for safely removing the corruption stones. By working in pairs and maintaining constant verbal contact, they could help each other recognize when the psychic manipulation was overwhelming their natural mental defenses. It was slow, dangerous work that required each person to voluntarily expose their deepest insecurities, while trusting their partner to guide them back to emotional stability. Superman found himself paired with Jaina for the most dangerous stones, those placed near the command tent where strategic decisions were made. As they worked, the Archmage shared insights that helped him understand the true scope of what they faced. Kil'jaeden isn't just trying to break up our alliance, she explained while carefully disenchanting a particularly potent corruption node. He's conducting psychological research. Every response we make to his manipulations provides data about our mental vulnerabilities. Then we're not just fighting to protect this camp, Superman realized. We're fighting to prevent him from developing more effective mental weapons to use against other heroes. Their work was interrupted when the largest corruption stone, hidden beneath the central command table, suddenly blazed with malevolent energy. Through its crystalline surface, the image of Kil'jaeden himself materialized, not physically present, but projecting his consciousness across dimensional barriers. The Eridar Lord's appearance was designed to be as psychologically disturbing as possible. His once noble features had been twisted into a mockery of wisdom, with eyes that held the accumulated malice of eons spent perfecting the art of corruption. When he spoke, his words carried undertones that bypassed conscious thought and struck directly at primal fears. How delightfully predictable. Kil'jaeden's projection sneered. The great champion of hope, reduced to crawling through dirt to remove a few simple enchantments. Tell me, Superman, how does it feel to know that while you waste time on this trivial exercise, 3 separate worlds are falling to Legion forces that could have been stopped if you were there instead? The cruelest part of this taunt was that it contained just enough truth to sting. Superman's enhanced hearing could perceive distress signals from across multiple dimensions, cries for help that his presence here prevented him from answering. The weight of omnipotence was knowing that every choice to help one group inherently meant abandoning others. You're trying to make me believe that helping anyone requires abandoning everyone else, Superman replied, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his thoughts. But that's the same fallacy that led Sargeras to choose destruction over creation. You can't save everyone, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't save anyone. Kil'jaeden's expression shifted to something that might have been genuine surprise. How remarkably naive. Do you truly believe that your small acts of heroism matter against the cosmic scale of suffering? Every life you save is a brief postponement of inevitable entropy. Maybe, Superman acknowledged, his hands still working to dismantle the corruption stone even while engaging in philosophical debate with one of the universe's most dangerous entities. But those brief postponements add up. Every moment of joy you preserve, every act of kindness you make possible, every time you choose to build instead of tear down, they create ripples that extend far beyond what you can see. The projection flickered as Kil'jaeden processed this response. For a being who had spent millennia perfecting arguments for why destruction was preferable to imperfect creation, encountering someone who acknowledged imperfection while still choosing hope was genuinely confusing. "You cannot maintain such optimism forever," the Eridar Lord finally said, his voice carrying less certainty than before. "The Legion has agents throughout the time stream. We know your future, Superman. We have seen the moment when your faith finally breaks, when you realize that all your efforts have been meaningless gestures against inevitable decay. Then you've seen one possible future," Superman replied, finally succeeding in disrupting the stone's enchantments. "But the thing about the future is that it's not fixed. Every choice we make creates new possibilities, new timelines where different outcomes become achievable." The projection began to fade as its anchor point was destroyed. But Kil'jaeden's final words carried a promise that chilled everyone present. "We shall test that theory extensively, Champion of Light. The Legion has prepared scenarios specifically designed to break beings like you. When next we meet, it will be in circumstances where your principles and your power are in direct conflict, where saving some requires sacrificing others, where the very act of being heroic creates more suffering than it prevents." As the last traces of the Eridar Lord's presence vanished, the camp was left in a silence that felt almost physical. The corruption stones had been removed, but everyone present understood that they had just experienced a preview of battles yet to come, conflicts that would be fought not with weapons or magic, but with competing visions of what existence should mean. Superman looked around at the assembled heroes, Alliance and Horde representatives who had moments before been on the verge of abandoning their cooperation, now united by the shared experience of resisting mental manipulation. They had passed their first test, but they all knew that Kil'jaeden's threats were not empty boasts. "So," Thrall said with a grim smile, "now we know what we're really fighting. Not just an army, but a philosophy that says hope is delusion and cooperation is impossible." "Then we'd better prove them wrong," Superman replied, his cape billowing in winds that carried the scent of growing things rather than corruption. "Because if we can't, then every world in every dimension becomes a target for their version of mercy." The dimensional gateway that materialized above Dalaran was unlike anything the magical city's defenders had encountered. Instead of the chaotic rifts typically torn by Legion forces, this portal maintained perfect geometric stability, its edges crackling with energies that seemed to bend space itself into impossible angles. What emerged from it defied classification by any known system of demonology. Archimonde the Defiler stepped through the gateway with measured deliberation, his massive form radiating an aura of absolute authority that made reality itself seem to hold its breath. But he was not alone. Behind him came beings that made even seasoned heroes question their sanity, entities that appeared to be corrupted versions of familiar champions from across multiple realities. Superman recognized the horror immediately. Among Archimonde's retinue walked a twisted version of himself, cape darkened to black, the S symbol on his chest transformed into a mark of conquest rather than hope. Beside this dark reflection stood corrupted versions of other heroes Superman had glimpsed during his dimensional transit. A Batman whose war on crime had become a war on free will, a Wonder Woman whose pursuit of justice had devolved into merciless tyranny. "Behold," Archimonde's voice boomed across Dalaran's floating spires, "the inevitable fate of all who claim to champion order and protection. These were once paragons of virtue in their respective realities, heroes whose names inspired hope across countless worlds. Now they serve as living proof that righteousness is merely delayed corruption." From the city's highest tower, the Council of Six emerged to assess this unprecedented threat. Khadgar, Archmage of Dalaran, his face grave with understanding of what they faced. "These aren't mere demons wearing familiar faces," he announced to the assembled defenders. "These are actual heroes who have been turned, their noble impulses inverted but not destroyed." Superman felt a chill that had nothing to do with Dalaran's mountain altitude. "They're showing me what I could become," he realized aloud. "Not through external corruption, but through the gradual erosion of the principles that define heroism." The dark Superman raised his head, meeting his counterpart's gaze across the dimensional divide. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of profound disillusionment. "I once believed, as you do, that individual actions could create meaningful change in a universe of infinite suffering. Then I watched civilizations fall while I saved single lives. I saw cosmic injustices that rendered my small victories meaningless. Eventually, I accepted that true mercy meant ending the struggle rather than prolonging it. That's not mercy, Superman replied, his voice carrying across the battlefield through sheer force of conviction. That's giving up. You stopped believing that the struggle itself has value. The corrupted Batman stepped forward, his cape billowing with shadows that seemed to devour light itself. Naive words from someone who hasn't lived long enough to see the full scope of the problem. How many criminals did I capture only to watch them escape and kill again? How many innocent people died because I refused to do what was necessary? And how many more died when you abandoned the principles that made you a hero in the first place? Superman countered. The moment you decided that you knew better than everyone else what justice meant, you stopped being a protector and became a tyrant. Archimond observed this exchange with the satisfaction of a master strategist watching his plan unfold. You see, Champion of Light, we do not seek to corrupt you through fell magic or demonic influence. We seek to educate you. These fallen heroes will demonstrate, through direct experience, the futility of maintaining moral constraints when facing unlimited evil. The battle that erupted transcended physical combat. Each of Superman's clashes with his dark counterpart became a philosophical argument conducted through exchanged blows and tactical choices. The corrupted version fought with ruthless efficiency, employing lethal force without hesitation and treating collateral damage as an acceptable cost of victory. But more disturbing than his alternative fighting style was the dark Superman's intimate knowledge of every doubt and insecurity that plagued his heroic counterpart. You hesitate before every strike, the fallen hero observed while deflecting Superman's heat vision with his own darker beams. You calculate whether your actions might cause unintended harm. That hesitation has cost lives, hasn't it? People who died while you debated the proper response to their suffering. Superman found himself reliving every moment when his commitment to minimizing harm had resulted in delayed action. The bank robbery where hostages died because he took time to ensure the building's structural integrity. The natural disaster where his refusal to use potentially dangerous solutions had limited his rescue efforts. The dark version of himself was forcing him to confront the mathematical reality that absolute moral purity was incompatible with maximum effectiveness. Meanwhile, throughout Dalaran, similar battles raged between other heroes and their corrupted counterparts. Jaina faced a version of herself who had embraced necromancy as the ultimate solution to the problem of death, raising fallen allies as willing undead rather than accepting loss. Thrall confronted an alternative who had bound the elements through force rather than cooperation, wielding nature's power as a weapon rather than working in harmony with it. Each confrontation was designed to highlight the potential endpoints of their heroic philosophies. The Legion wasn't trying to show them that their principles were wrong, but rather that taken to extremes, any virtue could become a vice. This is their real weapon, Superman realized during a brief lull in his battle with his dark reflection. They're not trying to corrupt us directly. They're trying to make us so afraid of becoming like them that we abandon the very principles that make us heroes. The insight came too late to prevent the trap's activation. Archimond had been manipulating the flow of battle to drive the heroes toward a specific location, the city's central ley line intersection, where Dalaran's magical energies were most concentrated. As the various conflicts converged on this point, the Demon Lord revealed his true purpose. You have fought admirably, Archimond announced, his massive form beginning to glow with accumulated magical energy. But you have also provided exactly what I needed. A detailed analysis of your decision-making processes under extreme stress. Observe. The air above the intersection shimmered, and suddenly Superman could see multiple timeline projections showing the potential consequences of every choice he had made during the battle. In one timeline, his refusal to use lethal force had allowed the Dark Superman to escape and destroy 3 worlds. In another, his decision to prioritize civilian safety had given Archimond time to complete a ritual that would corrupt the city's magical defenses. But most disturbing were the timelines where Superman's adherence to his principles had led to positive outcomes, only to create new problems that required increasingly difficult moral choices. It was a demonstration that heroism was not a path toward ultimate victory, but an endless series of impossible decisions where every choice carried a price. You begin to understand, the Dark Superman said, his voice carrying genuine sympathy for his uncorrupted counterpart. There is no perfect choice, no solution that doesn't require sacrifice. The only question is whether you will accept the responsibility of choosing who lives and who dies, or whether you will hide behind principles that prevent you from making the hard choices. Superman felt the weight of infinite responsibility settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. Every timeline projection showed him scenarios where his commitment to preserving life would result in greater suffering, where his refusal to compromise his values would force others to pay prices he was unwilling to accept. But as the psychological pressure reached its peak, Superman heard something that changed everything. The sound of children playing in Dalaran's lower districts, their laughter carrying through the magical barriers that protected them from the battle above. In that moment, he remembered something crucial that the Legion's manipulation had almost made him forget. "You're right," he said to his dark counterpart, his voice filled with quiet determination. "There is no perfect choice, but that's exactly why we need heroes. Not to make perfect decisions, but to make decisions that preserve the possibility of a better tomorrow. And if those decisions lead to suffering," the corrupted version challenged, "then we take responsibility for that suffering and work to prevent it in the future," Superman replied. "But we don't abandon hope just because the path forward is difficult." With that declaration, Superman did something that shocked both his enemies and allies. He stopped fighting his dark counterpart and instead extended his hand in offer of redemption. "It's not too late," he said. "Whatever choices led you to this point, you can still choose differently." The gesture created a moment of perfect silence across the battlefield. For an instant, something flickered in the dark Superman's eyes, a memory of who he had once been, a recognition of the hero he had abandoned. But before he could respond, Arshimon's roar of fury shattered the moment. "Enough!" the Demon Lord bellowed. "You will not corrupt my champions with false hope." But the damage was done. Superman's willingness to offer redemption even to his worst possible self had demonstrated something that the Legion's philosophy couldn't account for: the power of mercy to create new possibilities where none had existed before. The various timeline projections began shifting, showing new potential futures where even the darkest corruption could be healed. As Archimon prepared to unleash his full power to destroy these inconvenient possibilities, Superman realized that the real battle was just beginning. The Legion had shown him the worst-case scenarios of heroism, but they had also inadvertently revealed something else: that even in the darkest timelines, the choice to be better remained available to anyone willing to take it. The revelation came through intercepted Legion communications that Khadgar's scrying network had managed to decode. Hidden within the twisting nether itself, the Legion had constructed something that defied comprehension, a massive device that appeared to be part machine, part ritual circle, part living organism. The Great Engine, as the intercepted messages called it, was nearing completion after millennia of construction across multiple realities. "It's not just a weapon," Khadgar explained to the assembled War Council, his usually confident demeanor shaken by what his magical sight had revealed. "It's a reality-rewriting device designed to retroactively edit the fundamental laws that govern existence. If activated, it wouldn't just destroy our universe, it would make it so that our universe had never been capable of existing in the first place." Superman studied the scrying images with growing horror. The engine stretched across space itself, its components harvested from the corpses of destroyed worlds. At its heart pulsed what appeared to be a crystallized concept: the mathematical proof that suffering was inevitable and joy was merely a temporary anomaly to be corrected. "They're trying to solve the problem of evil by making good impossible," he realized. "Not just defeating hope, but editing reality so that hope becomes a logical contradiction." Thrall's shamanic senses recoiled from even the magical echoes of the device. The elements themselves flee from its presence. It radiates wrongness on such a fundamental level that natural laws begin to break down in its vicinity. But it was Vol'jin who identified the most disturbing aspect of the Legion's scheme. "Look at the power sources," he said, his shadow hunter abilities allowing him to perceive energy flows that others missed. "Da engine be powered by corrupted heroes from across the multiverse. Every champion they've turned feeds into it, their inverted nobility providing the spiritual energy needed for reality revision." The implication struck Superman like a physical blow. Every dark version of himself and other heroes wasn't just a psychological weapon. They were batteries for a device that would unmake the possibility of heroism itself. The corrupted Batman, the fallen Wonder Woman, his own dark reflection, they were all components in a cosmic machine designed to prove that virtue was ultimately self-defeating. "We have to destroy it," Superman declared, but even as he spoke, he could see the tactical impossibility of what he was suggesting. The engine existed in the twisting nether, surrounded by Legion forces numbering in the billions, protected by reality-warping defenses that made conventional assault meaningless. "Direct attack would be suicide," King Varian stated bluntly. "Even if we could somehow breach their defenses, the engine itself is protected by the combined despair of every corrupted hero feeding into it. Their collective disillusionment creates a field that prevents heroic action from succeeding." Adal's crystalline form pulsed with urgent analysis. "However, there may be another approach. The engine's fundamental flaw is that it requires the willing participation of corrupted champions. If even one of them could be redeemed, the whole system would become unstable. Jaina finished, her arcane expertise grasping the implications immediately. It's like removing a keystone from an arch. The entire structure would collapse. But Superman was already thinking beyond tactical considerations to the human cost of such a mission. Getting close enough to attempt redemption would mean infiltrating the heart of Legion territory, surrounded by entities whose entire existence is dedicated to proving that hope is meaningless. Worse than that, Karen added grimly. To reach the corrupted heroes, you would have to allow yourself to be captured. The Legion would use every moment of your imprisonment to demonstrate why your principles are flawed. The plan that emerged from their discussions was audacious in its simplicity and terrifying in its implications. Superman would surrender himself to the Legion, allowing them to believe they had succeeded in capturing their ultimate prize. Once inside their stronghold, he would have to maintain his principles while surrounded by the accumulated despair of corrupted champions from across reality. I won't pretend this isn't essentially a suicide mission, Superman told the assembled leaders, but if there's even a chance that reaching one of those fallen heroes could bring down the entire engine, you cannot do this alone, Thrall interrupted. The spiritual pressure of so much concentrated corruption would overwhelm any individual, no matter how strong their convictions. It was then that something unprecedented happened. Representatives from both Alliance and Horde stepped forward to volunteer for what everyone understood was likely a one-way mission. Jaina offered her expertise in magical defenses against corruption. Vol'jin provided his knowledge of shadow magic and spiritual protection. Even King Varian, setting aside a lifetime of political caution, declared his intention to join the assault. This goes beyond faction loyalty, he explained when questioned about his decision. If Superman is right about the power of redemption to create new possibilities, then this mission isn't just about destroying a weapon. It's about proving that the bonds between people who share common values are stronger than the forces that drive them apart. The infiltration began with Superman's public capture during a staged battle near Outland's shattered remnants. Legion forces, believing they had finally obtained their prize, transported him directly to their stronghold in the twisting nether, while his allies followed using stealth magic and dimensional camouflage that even Adol's advanced light-weaving could barely maintain. The Legion citadel exceeded their worst expectations. Built from the bones of dead worlds and powered by the screams of destroyed civilizations, it existed in a state of permanent reality flux, where the laws of physics bent to accommodate whatever form of suffering was most convenient at any given moment. Superman was brought before Sargeras himself, not the corrupted Titan's physical form, which existed on a scale too vast for direct interaction, but a manifestation of his consciousness that radiated hopelessness, like a dark star radiates light. The fallen Titan's presence was so overwhelming that Superman felt his very atoms trying to surrender to the certainty of ultimate defeat. So, Sargeras said, his voice like the death cry of galaxies, the champion of light comes at last to witness the completion of our great work. Tell me, do you still believe that existence is preferable to oblivion after seeing what your interference has accomplished? Around them, holographic displays showed the consequences of Superman's actions across multiple timelines. Worlds where his intervention had delayed Legion conquest, only to result in more creative forms of destruction. Civilizations that had rallied to fight because of his example, only to suffer more complete annihilation when they inevitably failed. You have prolonged countless struggles, Sargeras continued, extended infinite suffering, given false hope to beings who would have found peace in swift destruction. Your heroism has been the cruelest torture of all, the delusion that resistance to entropy serves any purpose other than amplifying the final disappointment. Superman listened to these accusations while simultaneously using his enhanced senses to map the Citadel's layout and locate the corrupted heroes powering the great engine. He could feel their presence like wounds in reality itself, concentrated points of inverted nobility that made his soul ache with sympathetic pain. You're not wrong about the consequences, Superman admitted, surprising Sargeras with his willingness to acknowledge the Dark Titan's points. My actions have led to suffering. Every choice I've made has carried costs that someone else had to pay. Then you understand, Sargeras said, his tone carrying something that might have been relief. You see why ending the cycle of struggle is the only true mercy. I understand the temptation, Superman corrected. But understanding why someone chooses despair doesn't mean accepting that despair is the only rational response. You've spent so long cataloging everything that's wrong with existence that you've forgotten to look for what's right with it. The exchange was interrupted by alarms throughout the Citadel as Superman's allies revealed themselves, launching their desperate assault on the engine's power sources. But their attack wasn't aimed at destroying the corrupted heroes. It was focused on creating enough chaos to allow Superman access to them. Fighting his way through Legion defenses while maintaining his commitment to non-lethal force seemed impossible until Superman realized something crucial about the nature of their environment. The twisting nether responded to conceptual framework as much as physical force. By refusing to accept that victory required abandoning his principles, he was literally rewriting the local rules of reality. Where Superman fought with restraint rather than ruthlessness, pockets of stable space-time began forming. Where he chose protection over destruction, the Citadel's reality warping effects began to stabilize. Most importantly, where he demonstrated that power could be used responsibly, the corrupted heroes powering the engine began to remember what they had once believed. The first breakthrough came when Superman reached his own dark counterpart, still chained to the engine's power matrix, but no longer completely lost to despair. "You came back," the corrupted version whispered. "Even after seeing what I became, you came back. I told you it wasn't too late," Superman replied, extending his hand again. "That offer wasn't conditional on you being perfect. It was based on you being willing to try again." What happened next created ripple effects throughout the entire Legion stronghold. As Superman's dark reflection chose redemption over despair, the conceptual foundations that powered the great engine began to crack. The mathematical proof that suffering was inevitable started generating logical contradictions. Most importantly, other corrupted heroes throughout the Citadel began to sense that change was possible. But Sargeras was not about to watch eons of work unravel without a final, desperate gambit. "If redemption is possible," the Dark Titan declared, "then I will demonstrate its true cost. Choose, Champion of Light. Save your corrupted reflection, and watch as I personally destroy every world you have ever tried to protect. Or maintain your principles and witness the completion of the engine that will make heroism itself impossible." Standing in the heart of the Legion's greatest stronghold, surrounded by the accumulated malice of countless fallen civilizations, Superman faced the ultimate test of everything he claimed to believe about the power of hope, to create new possibilities where none had existed before. The moment Sargeras presented his ultimatum, Superman felt the weight of infinite worlds pressing down upon his shoulders. Through dimensional viewing screens that materialized around the great engine, he could see the civilizations hanging in the balance. Children playing in Stormwind's gardens, shamanistic ceremonies in Thunderbluff, the quiet dignity of Night Elf scholars in Darnassus. All of it would be swept away if he chose wrong. But instead of the paralyzing despair that Sargeras expected, something else happened. Superman closed his eyes and reached out with senses that transcended the physical, touching the essence of every corrupted hero chained to the engine's power matrix. What he found there changed everything. "You're making a false assumption," Superman said, his voice carrying across the Citadel with crystalline clarity. "You think I have to choose between saving one person and saving everyone else. But that's only true if you accept that there are only two options available." Sargeras's massive form loomed closer, reality warping around him like molten glass. "Speak plainly, Champion. What delusion offers you escape from this choice?" Superman opened his eyes, and they blazed not with heat vision, but with something far more dangerous to the Legion's philosophy: absolute certainty. "The third option, the one you can't see because you've spent so long believing that heroism is about making impossible choices that you've forgotten. It's actually about creating new possibilities." With those words, Superman did something that defied every tactical expectation. Instead of trying to save his corrupted counterpart or defending against Sargeras's threatened attack, he began systematically destroying the chains that bound every corrupted hero to the great engine. "Madness!" Sargeras roared as alarms screamed throughout the Citadel. "You doom us all! Without their power to stabilize the engine, the reality distortions will tear apart this entire sector of the Nether." "Exactly," Superman replied, his movements becoming a blur as he raced from one power matrix to the next. "You built your ultimate weapon assuming that corrupted heroes would always remain corrupted. But the moment even one of them chooses redemption, your entire system becomes unstable." The first chain snapped, freeing the Dark Batman, who staggered away from his power coupling with confusion written across his features. I remember," he whispered, touching his chest where the symbol of his crusade had been twisted into something unrecognizable. "I remember why I began this fight." The second chain broke, liberating the fallen Wonder Woman, whose lasso of truth had been perverted into a weapon of forced despair. "The mission," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Protect the innocent. Fight for those who cannot fight for themselves." How did I forget something so fundamental? But it was the reaction of Superman's own dark reflection that created the cascade failure Sargeras had feared. As his chains dissolved, The corrupted version looked at his heroic counterpart with eyes that held recognition rather than hatred. You didn't come here to prove you were better than me, he realized. You came here to prove that I was better than what I had become. The philosophical implications of this revelation rippled through the great engine like a computer virus. The device had been constructed on the mathematical certainty that corruption was irreversible, that heroes would inevitably fall to despair when confronted with the true scope of cosmic injustice. But Superman's actions were generating proof of concept for an entirely different equation, one where redemption was always possible as long as someone was willing to believe in it. Impossible calculations, the engine's artificial consciousness announced in a voice like grinding gears. Redemption paradox detected. Heroism variables exceeding programmed parameters. System failure imminent. Sargeras watched his ultimate weapon beginning to tear itself apart and felt something he had not experienced in eons: doubt. Not about his assessment of existence's fundamental cruelty, but about whether his response to that cruelty was the only viable option. You have doomed countless worlds, he accused Superman, but his voice lacked its earlier certainty. Even if your friends survive the engine's destruction, the chaos released will consume entire star systems. Maybe, Superman acknowledged while freeing the last of the corrupted champions. But chaos isn't the same thing as evil. Chaos can create new possibilities, new chances for something better to emerge. Your order only guarantees that nothing will ever change. The great engine's death throes created reality storms that swept across the twisting nether like cosmic hurricanes. But instead of the random destruction that Sargeras had predicted, something unprecedented began happening. The liberated heroes, their noble natures restored but their memories of corruption intact, began working together to channel the chaotic energies into constructive rather than destructive patterns. The Dark Batman used his strategic genius to identify safe paths through the collapsing reality distortions. The redeemed Wonder Woman channeled the engine's destructive output into her restored lasso, using it to bind dangerous energy fluctuations until they could be safely dispersed. Superman's alternate self took responsibility for protecting the weakest among their group, proving that his redemption was genuine through selfless action. This is impossible, Sargeras repeated, but now his voice carried wonder rather than anger. They were completely corrupted. Their fall was absolute. How can they simply choose to be better? Because corruption isn't a permanent state, Superman explained while helping to stabilize a particularly dangerous reality fracture. It's a series of choices, and as long as someone is capable of making choices, they're capable of making different choices. But the most profound transformation was happening to Sargeras himself. Watching heroes who had fallen to the depths of despair climb back toward the light, he began to remember why he had originally chosen to fight against evil rather than surrender to it. For the first time in millennia, the Dark Titan allowed himself to consider the possibility that his grand solution might have been wrong. I have seen civilizations rise and fall across countless eons, Sargeras said, his voice losing its edge of absolute certainty. I witnessed such suffering, such injustice, such waste of potential. The cycle seemed endless, inevitable. Destruction appeared to be the only mercy that could end the pain. The cycle is endless, Superman agreed, surprising everyone with his acknowledgement of the Dark Titan's observations. There will always be new challenges, new forms of evil, new sources of suffering. But that's exactly why heroes matter. Not because we can end the struggle, but because we can ensure it continues to have meaning. The philosophical reversal created shockwaves that extended far beyond the dying engine. Throughout the Legion's ranks, demons who had served for eons began questioning orders that suddenly seemed less like inevitable necessity and more like choices they had made. The mathematical certainty that had justified their actions was crumbling, replaced by the terrifying possibility that they might have been wrong. Kil'jaeden materialized beside his master, his usual composure shattered by the sight of the great engine's collapse. My lord, if the champion's redemption spreads to our forces, the entire Legion could fragment. Our unity depends on shared certainty that our path is the only rational response to existence's fundamental flaws. Perhaps, Sargeras replied, his gaze fixed on Superman and the redeemed heroes as they worked to contain the reality storm. That certainty was our greatest weakness. We became so convinced that we understood the nature of existence that we stopped looking for evidence that might contradict our conclusions. The final phase of the engine's destruction created a moment of perfect clarity where the barriers between dimensions became transparent. Superman could see across infinite realities, witnessing the countless variations of heroism that existed throughout the multiverse. But more importantly, he could see the ripple effects of every act of courage, every moment when someone chose to help rather than harm. The accumulated weight of these positive actions across all realities created a pattern that was visible only from this cosmic perspective. Individual acts of heroism might seem insignificant against the vast scale of universal suffering, but when viewed from outside linear time, they formed a growing network of light that was slowly but steadily transforming the fundamental nature of existence itself. "Do you see it now?" Superman asked Sargeras, sharing this cosmic vision through their proximity to the collapsing engine. "Evil isn't winning. It's not even keeping pace. Every person who chooses to be kind instead of cruel, every moment when someone puts others before themselves, every time hope triumphs over despair, they're all connected. They're all part of something larger than any individual world or civilization." Sargeras stared at this revelation with the amazement of someone seeing color for the first time after a lifetime of blindness. The network of heroic actions stretched across dimensions, creating patterns of meaning that made the universe itself seem like a collaborative work of art in progress, rather than a meaningless accident awaiting correction. "I have been wrong," the Dark Titan admitted, his voice carrying the weight of cosmic scale recognition. "My response to suffering was to eliminate the possibility of joy. But joy is not the absence of suffering. It is the triumph over suffering. By seeking to end the struggle, I would have destroyed the very thing that makes existence meaningful." The great engine's final collapse sent the last of its reality distortions cascading through the twisting nether. But instead of creating destruction, the energies were absorbed by the network of redeemed heroes and transformed into something unprecedented. A wave of restoration that began healing the spiritual wounds the Legion had inflicted across countless worlds. As the chaos subsided and the immediate crisis passed, Superman found himself face to face with Sargeras in a moment of perfect quiet. The Dark Titan's form was already beginning to change, his corrupted appearance slowly shifting back towards something that suggested nobility rather than destruction. "What happens now?" Sargeras asked, his voice holding uncertainty for the first time in eons. "I have spent so long being the embodiment of cosmic despair that I no longer remember how to be anything else." Superman smiled, extending his hand to the being who had been the greatest threat existence had ever faced. "Now you do what every hero has to do when they realize they've been making mistakes. You try to do better tomorrow than you did today." 6 months after the great engine's destruction, Superman stood on the restored cliffs of Hellfire Peninsula, watching as former Legion demons worked alongside Alliance and Horde engineers to repair the dimensional tears that had scarred Outland for decades. The sight still amazed him. Beings who had spent eons destroying worlds now dedicating themselves to healing the damage they had caused. Sargeras approached from behind, his footsteps no longer shaking the ground with barely contained rage. The fallen Titan's redemption had been the most gradual and difficult of all, requiring him to confront not just his own actions, but the philosophical framework that had justified them. His new form, while still imposing, radiated purpose rather than despair. "The rehabilitation centers are exceeding all projections," Sargeras reported, his voice carrying notes of something that might have been pride. "Former Legion commanders are proving remarkably effective at understanding and treating the psychological damage caused by prolonged exposure to fell corruption." Superman nodded, watching a group of redeemed Eridar working with Draenei priests to purify a tainted crystal formation. Who better to understand corruption than someone who's overcome it themselves? Experience is the greatest teacher, even when the lessons are painful. The transformation hadn't been instant or easy. Many former Legion forces had struggled with the concept that their eons of service had been based on flawed premises. Some had retreated into isolation, unable to process the magnitude of their mistakes. Others had thrown themselves into reconstruction work with a fervor that bordered on obsession, as if they could atone for past destruction through present creation. But perhaps the most remarkable change had occurred within the mortal races of Azeroth. The crisis had forced Alliance and Horde to work so closely together that their traditional animosities had begun to seem artificial. When faced with cosmic-scale threats, the petty territorial disputes that had consumed them for generations revealed themselves as exactly that, petty. Thrall joined them on the cliff, his shamanic senses reading the flow of energies that now coursed through the healing world. "The elements speak of balance returning," he reported. "Not the fragile equilibrium we maintained before, but something more robust. The scars left by the Legion's presence are becoming part of the world's natural pattern, rather than wounds that refuse to heal." "Scars can be stronger than unmarked skin," Superman observed, thinking of his own journey from isolated alien to integrated hero. "They remind us where we've been while proving we survived the experience." The sound of approaching footsteps announced the arrival of other familiar faces. Jaina emerged from a portal that sparkled with energies far cleaner than the fuel-tainted gateways they had grown accustomed to during the war. Behind her came representatives from across the recovered multiverse, heroes who had returned to their home dimensions carrying news of the Legion's transformation. "The reports from parallel Earths are encouraging," Jaina announced, her expression carrying a mixture of relief and wonder. "The network effect Superman identified is accelerating. Acts of heroism in one reality are somehow inspiring similar actions across dimensional barriers." Superman had been studying this phenomenon with growing fascination. The cosmic perspective granted by the engine's destruction had revealed that heroism operated according to principles that transcended individual universes. When someone chose courage over fear, compassion over cruelty, or hope over despair, those choices created resonances that strengthened similar decisions elsewhere. "It's like moral quantum entanglement," he explained to the gathered leaders. "Good acts in one reality make good acts more likely in all realities. The reverse was true too, which is how the Legion managed to spread so effectively. But now that we've broken their philosophical monopoly, the trend is reversing." King Varian, whose kingdom had become a model for post-war reconstruction, raised a practical concern. "The immediate crisis has passed, but what happens when the euphoria of victory fades? Human nature hasn't fundamentally changed. We'll still have conflicts, still face temptations to choose the easy path over the right one. Then we'll face those challenges together," Superman replied. "Not as separate factions trying to impose our will on each other, but as people who've learned that our differences make us stronger rather than weaker." And the conversation was interrupted by the arrival of an unexpected visitor. A dimensional portal opened, and through it stepped a figure that made everyone present pause in recognition. It was another Superman, but not the corrupted version they had redeemed. This was clearly a variant from a different reality, his costume bearing subtle differences that marked him as coming from an entirely separate timeline. "I apologize for the intrusion," the alternate Superman said, his voice carrying the same fundamental kindness that characterized all versions of the character who remained true to their principles. "But we've been monitoring the dimensional ripples from your recent victory. The effects are spreading to realities that the Legion never directly touched." He gestured, and holographic displays materialized, showing dozens of different Earths, Kryptons, and other worlds. "In my reality, crime rates have dropped by 30% in the past 6 months. Not because of increased law enforcement, but because more people are choosing to help their neighbors instead of exploiting them. It's as if your demonstration that heroism can triumph over cosmic-scale evil has convinced people that smaller-scale heroism is worthwhile." Sargeras listened to this report with the fascination of someone whose worldview had been completely inverted. "You're describing the opposite of the cascade failure I sought to create. Instead of despair spreading across dimensions, hope is becoming contagious." "Hope was always contagious," Superman corrected gently. "The Legion just made it harder to spread by convincing people that it was naive or futile. Once we proved that hope could triumph even in the worst possible circumstances, the natural tendency toward cooperation and kindness was free to express itself." As if to illustrate this point, a young orc child ran up to the group, her arms full of flowers that had somehow begun growing in soil that had been barren for decades. She offered one to each of the assembled leaders with the unconscious generosity that children displayed before learning to be suspicious of others. "For the heroes," she said simply, then ran back toward the settlement where her family was helping to plant the first gardens in Hellfire Peninsula's restored Earth. The gesture was small, almost insignificant in the context of their cosmic struggles. But Superman recognized it as representative of something profound, the recognition that heroism wasn't limited to those with exceptional powers or positions of authority. Every person who chose kindness over indifference was participating in the same fundamental choice that had allowed him to redeem corrupted champions and transform the Legion itself. "So what's next?" Vol'jin asked, his Shadowhunter instincts already turning toward future challenges. "We've proven that redemption is possible even into worst circumstances, but maintaining what we've built will require constant vigilance." Superman considered the question while watching the sunset paint the restored landscape in shades of gold and crimson. "We keep doing what we've been doing," he said finally. "We help where we can, protect those who need protection, and remember that every choice to be better than we were yesterday makes it easier for someone else to make the same choice." Thrall smiled at the simplicity of this philosophy. The shamanic path teaches that the most profound changes begin with individual decisions to live in harmony with the world around us. What you're describing is the same principle applied on a cosmic scale. As night fell over Outland, the assembled heroes began to disperse to their various responsibilities. The work of rebuilding would take generations, and there would undoubtedly be setbacks along the way. But for the first time in eons, the future seemed to hold more possibilities than problems. Superman remained on the cliff as the others departed, joined only by Sargeras, who had developed a habit of seeking solitude during the difficult process of reconstructing his identity. The former Dark Titan had become something unprecedented, a being of cosmic power dedicated to healing rather than destruction. "Do you ever regret it?" Sargeras asked, his voice carrying genuine curiosity. "The responsibility you've taken on by proving that redemption is always possible? Every time someone falls to corruption now, there will be those who ask why you didn't save them too." Superman considered the question with the gravity it deserved. "I regret every person I haven't been able to help," he admitted. "But I've learned that regret isn't the same thing as failure. Regret means you care enough to want to do better next time. And if next time you fail again, then I try again the time after that," Superman replied. "That's what being a hero really means. Not being perfect, but being willing to keep trying even when perfection seems impossible." Above them, stars that had once seemed cold and distant now appeared to pulse with warmth, as if the universe itself had awakened to the possibility that existence could be a collaborative work of art rather than a random collection of accidents waiting to be corrected. In the distance, the lights of the growing settlement twinkled like earthbound stars, each one representing someone who had chosen to build rather than destroy, to hope rather than despair, to believe that tomorrow could be better than today. It was a small light against the cosmic darkness, but Superman had learned that small lights, when multiplied across infinite realities, could illuminate universes. His journey from the dying world of Krypton to this moment of cosmic transformation had taught him something that even his vast powers couldn't have revealed, that the most important battles weren't fought with strength or speed or heat vision, but with the simple revolutionary decision to treat existence as sacred rather than meaningless. As he prepared to return to his adopted worlds and continue the endless, worthwhile work of being a hero, Superman reflected on the truth that had made everything else possible, that in a universe where anyone could choose to be better than they were, everyone eventually would.